Well, welcome back, and again, we're sorry we missed our connection with Joe DiTomaso. Last I heard, everything was a go for him, so apologize to you that came to hear his presentation and he wasn't able to make it. So, anyways, our afternoon presentations, we're starting to get into the meat of it. We're going to talk about tools. And so Joe was actually going to be talking about herbicides and how they are used in an EBIPM system. And if you guys want to follow up a little bit on that aspect of tools and EBIPM, our website's probably a really good choice to find information on that and some of the recommendations that have been coming out of the research that's been done so far with the area-wide project. So, but as my title today suggests, we're going to have a little cow talk and really begin to recognize how we can use livestock. I'm going to be probably saying cows or cattle mostly, but really any livestock species as a way to more effectively manage specifically invasive annual grasses. Now, EBIPM isn't just for invasive annual grasses, but this project that we've all been doing in the Great Basin, we've all been focusing specifically on invasive annual grasses. So we often hear, talks and everyone just sort of lines out the tools and says, yeah, you can use herbicides, you can graze, and then that's all you hear. And our effort in developing some information about the grazing treatments in the EBIPM is to start putting some specific ideas and guidelines forward that might actually help you develop a grazing treatment. So my outline today then is first of all just to kind of give you an idea of what I feel is pretty much the value of grazing as a management tool, how it fits into the EBIPM program or planning and system, what is the green and brown strategy, and how to use it. So when we think about cows and we think about invasive annual grasses, a couple of things should click. The first is that the potential, and it's actually very exciting, the potential for using livestock to graze invasive annual grasses such as cheatgrass or medusa head, because they're the one tool, and I'm not saying you're going to make money with using livestock to graze, but they are the only one that actually gives you the potential to make money when you're using it to improve your rangelands. The other is that we typically have this tool readily available. In many cases in our western rangelands where we have extensive infestations of annual grasses, we have the tool there, and so why not use it? As far as, how does the livestock fit into an EBIPM system? Well, of course, we have, all our different tools. We have the potential for biocontrol. We have fire, herbicides, revegetation, reseeding. So all of these tools then can be integrated and be used together in developing a plan, an EBIPM plan. The one neat thing, too, about livestock in this situation is that in many cases we're looking at not just land that is infested with annual grasses, but we're looking to protect areas that have not become infested. And this is where we can use the tool of livestock as well, to protect our lands, keep them resistant to infestations. So again, you all have been getting doses of the EBIPM model. So we are now at step 4 in our process today. We've talked about how we assess the rangeland, identifying the actual causes and the ecological processes that may be not functioning or in disrepair. We've talked a lot about the different principles that link those processes to how we're going to begin to choose our tools and strategies. So here we are with the cattle then in step 4. And where we're actually going with this, we've seen Roger talked about processes. So we have processes that we may be affecting with using a grazing treatment. So we have We may need to create disturbance, lessen disturbance, affect seed dispersal and the amount of seeds produced, how we can stress the undesirable plants, create less stress for our desired plants. And we have then the principles that help us determine how we're going to set that grazing treatment up. And as Tom said, this isn't rocket science, this is range science. So these principles are pretty straightforward, common sense things, but they really do help guide us in how we're going to affect our processes. So with principle number 1 then, pretty straightforward. We're really looking to keep annual grasses from flowering. We are all very well aware of the capacity of annual grasses, cheatgrass, medusa head, ventonata, to produce astonishing amounts of seed. And we also know that the only way that they can promote themselves to the next season is through the production of seed. So whatever we can do in terms of setting up a grazing treatment to lower our seed production, we're going to be ahead of the game. The other really main principle that's going to guide our grazing treatments is scientifically founded on understanding that if we keep the perennial plants strong, healthy, vigorously growing, that we're going to be keeping nutrients tied up, that will keep the area resistant, site availability low, and keep our invasive species from coming in. So those are really 2 main principles then. And the moment we've all been waiting for, the unveiling of the green and brown strategy. So, Roger and I coined the term, it's the green and brown strategy, really as a way just to keep in the top of your head what we're looking to do when we're using livestock to really begin to impact these invasive annual grasses. And essentially, it's a high-intensity grazing while our annual grasses are green, actively growing, vigorously growing, palatable, because when they're actively growing, they're more palatable and preferred over our perennials that are dormant, and brown. So we're grazing our invasive annuals heavily, high intensity when they're green, and recognizing especially that we have this critical transition period when we start to get green up of our perennial plants, our desired plants. This is when we need to act, and we need to be paying very close attention through monitoring to know when this is occurring, because it's not, even though we have the calendar date here, it's not based on the calendar. It's based on the growth stage of these plants, and we have to be aware of when that's happening and be able to be flexible and adaptable to get the livestock off and to provide our perennial plants at this point an advantage, a more competitive advantage to be able to go ahead and grow and reproduce seed. We know that many of our perennial plants don't produce as much seed, so whatever seed they produce, we want that to happen. So that is essentially the green and brown strategy. There are a number of factors that play a pretty critical role in making sure that this green and brown strategy works. So the science behind it is the timing is to definitely plan by your plant growth stage, not dates, calendar dates. We're going to be trying to increase the intensity so we can really get that biomass off for those invasive annual grasses. And frequency is going to be, for our desired plants, enough time so that they can recover, they can maintain their root growth and root structure so that they are able to keep resources tied up. But also preference and palatability are crucial. Again, we want, this is what's differentiating between the cattle or the livestock eating the desired plants or the undesirable plants and not harming the, or not necessarily harming, but grazing our desired plants. Stocking rate and the class of livestock. And again, livestock are any species. Again, I'm talking primarily cattle, but if you have goats and you have Medusa head, well, you can use them. So we feel like there's kind of three main things in that in order for a green and brown strategy to work out is that you want to keep your stocking rates high so that you can graze the annual grasses intensively while they're actively growing. Recognize that you have that critical transition period, that you've got to get the animals out when the desired perennials start to green up, and that it's not a one-season deal. This is a commitment to the long-term and a long-term approach to managing the invasive annual grasses. So I'm going to switch a little bit into the presentation now. We get a lot of producers and land managers. They come to us and they're like, we talk about EBIPM, and then they say, well, now what do I do? So it's sort of an overwhelming prospect, and particularly if you're faced with massive infestations of annual grasses or they're knocking on your back door. So we have kind of set up a priority system as a way to best use your resources and your efforts. So what are you going to do first? And in that vein, then I'm going to talk about the green and brown strategy under three management scenarios. If you have land that is not infested, that should be your #1 priority to preventing an infestation from occurring. So if you only have so much money or so much time, find that land that is not infested and make sure that it doesn't become infested. And how would you use annual or grazing in a situation, the green and brown strategy in a situation like that? Well, essentially, with timing, you're going to want your perennial plants to be able to set seed. So you're going to want to graze after seed set. Intensity is going to be a little bit less because you don't have to graze so intense because they're not growing as fast as an annual grass. And so that 50-50 rule is generally a good rule. Take 50, leave 50 in an even pattern. This makes sure that you don't have decadent material building up and shading out your perennial plants. And frequency is more about the recovery time. So after they've been through and grazed, that your plants have had enough time to recover, set seed, make sure your roots are growing and healthy. So that's one way you can use the green and brown strategy if your priority is not, the first priority is to prevent an infestation from occurring. So in the second situation, you do have some annual grasses coming in. It may be patchy, it may be large patches of monoculture of annual grasses coming in, but you still have perennial plants, residual perennial plants in the system that may be able to recover if you can remove the competitive aspect of the annual grasses. And so how would you use a green and brown strategy then in a control situation where you still have, well, even up to 10 to 15% of residual perennial plants? In this situation, timing is, well, actually, let me go back just a little bit. In this situation, it's probably going to take the most management to make this happen. So you're really going to have to be on top of management, because not only are you going to have to hit the annual grasses hard, you're going to have to make sure that you really know that critical transition period, because remember, we only have 10 to 15% of the perennials out there, and you're going to have to make sure you know when those are starting to grow and green up, so that you're starting to give them as much a competitive advantage as possible. We want them to produce as much seed as possible, take as much resources as possible. So if you're going to be trying to use grazing in this situation, you really need to have plan B for where those cattle are going to go as soon as green up occurs, because we all know that it could happen in 1 month or 3 months. So it's a big deal, but you have to hit those annual grasses hard in this situation. So that's the second scenario. So the third scenario, this is your third management priority, and I know it seems really counterintuitive that you have just a massive monoculture of invasive annual grasses, and I'm telling you that that's the last place you need to be putting your resources. But this is going to be your most expensive place to be placing your resources. And if you're putting all your money here on already degraded land and you let the annual grasses scream around into areas that have not previously been infested, then you're just, you know, chasing your tail. So in an grazing strategy, the green and brown strategy for essentially a monoculture of invasive annual grasses, well, clearly timing isn't probably not as crucial in this point because you just need to be hitting it hard. And essentially 3 years of heavy grazing will probably finally reduce your seed bank and seed reproduction of your annual grasses so that you can begin to start thinking about restoring and reseeding a site. But you're going to be grazing very intensively, trying to get the cattle in, graze it hard, get them back before the annual grasses are able to recover to any degree. And clearly, you know, you may be able to feed on, you don't maybe even necessarily need to keep the cattle off the ground here at this point before you reseed. So frequency is a lot, but you would probably have to figure out some sort of extra feeding situation in these annual grass situations. So that's, I should say, and we also recognize in these annual grass situations where you have monocultures that it's going to take a lot of livestock to be able to get the intensity to graze these things really hard. Our pastures, we know, you know, I think Stacy Davies said the other day he had a 500,000 acre pasture. So if you are trying to get the intensity on these great big pastures in our west, and especially with limited water development, we recognize that this can be a challenge. So with that, I would like to let you know that we have developed this green and brown guide. Hopefully it would provide you, if you're managing land and want to try to start incorporating livestock into an invasive annual grass program, this can help you out. We do have a worksheet so that if you want to start figuring out, you know, when your life stage is occurring and begin to monitor life stages of your desirable plants and know when that critical transition period is occurring, that's in this guidebook. We also recognize that there is a lot of really good information on grazing out there, but really nothing specifically on invasive annual grasses. But we've provided links to additional resources for grazing and particularly ways that we can start thinking out of the box for water development, fencing, how are we going to develop the intensity in these situations. So that ends my green and brown strategy cow talk.